Yeah,
Good.
that's better quality.
Okay, so then we all have to agree or whatever. Okay,
Okay.
Acknowledge it, I guess.
yeah.
And I think Kent always kept it in gallery view.
Yeah.
You could keep it in, you could have it in speaker view, or there's another
Ah,
setting that has
Well,
the last couple. There's also multi-speaker, which keeps the last few toward the top so you can see them a little bigger.
okay.
And the rest of us will be lower down.
What I normally do, Ron, is when the person starts speaking, I usually go to speaker view.
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Um,
because we're going to have some, what do
and
you call it? The
also,
slideshow.
yeah, also,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
Nick is
A
gonna,
short slideshow.
yeah, yeah.
No, but
Okay,
that'll
let's
happen either
go.
way.
Okay, here comes Jeff. Okay, let's go for intros. And David Lelyfeld, you're the host now.
Okay, so to the new people here, um, we normally start with introducing ourselves in no particular order, uh, but I'll call on you. And on my screen, Albert is the first.
Um, okay.
So, if you would just say very briefly something about yourself and where you
Well,
are and what you do, but also Nick raised the question, and maybe you could say in a sentence or two what your political activism has been over the years.
okay. Well,
We want to keep it
let's
brief.
see. Why don't we begin with some basic biography and we'll get to political activity later. So, I am a member of the Harvard class of 63, as I presume everybody else is, except for our guest speaker. I think I'm probably a year older than everybody because of a disagreement with a sixth grade teacher that kept me from going to the New York system of doing 3 years of junior high school in two. Is that right? I'm 84. How many of you are 84?
I'm 85.
I'm
Ah,
85.
okay, good. So
85.
it's just my high school classmates that I'm out of sync with, not my college classmates. So um, I uh, was born in New York, went to Bronx High School of Science, where I finished second in my class, which was good enough to get me into Harvard, I guess, without having any coaching on how to write a admissions essay. I went through all my degrees, including a PhD in applied math at Harvard. And then after a couple of years, I joined the faculty at MIT, where I remained for 49 years in computer science and math, having retired about a half a dozen years ago. Um, I've been married. I was first married to a classmate, Cliffy, for formally actually 16 years, although we were only together for about a dozen years, and had two children. And I've subsequently been married for 45 years to uh, a former student and even briefly colleague at MIT, although not any longer a colleague. And we have two children, and I have four grandchildren. Politically, I would say, utterly apolitical and ignorant for most of my life until um, maybe October 7th,
Hmm.
2023, when with an old high school classmate, I was shocked at his an essay that he wrote that still has my head spinning, in which he decided that Israel was immoral and Hamas was amoral. I read that essay three times and it made my head spin. And I haven't actually followed up with that high school classmate to discuss it because anyway, it motivated me to inform myself about the subject and get. So I lived in such a cocoon that this was the first time an actual acquaintance was coming out as an anti-Zionist, uh, and I uh, and I thought Well, yes, I've always been a Zionist, but an uninformed one that I never thought about what I really believed. So, in fact, since October 7th, 3 years ago, I have been spending many hours a day reading the newspapers and the magazines and some historical books trying to understand the history of the Middle East. And I think in the end, I come in about where Tom Friedman sits, um, as a uh, and the New Israel Foundation, where there's two indigenous populations that are not going anywhere. They've got to find a way to live together. What that is, I don't
I'm going to
know.
stop you
Excuse me?
because since you were the first, you didn't know that we have to be brief.
Oh,
So to
so
get to our talk. So, but
I
I
accept
think
that
I
intervention.
hope that,
I've said my piece anyway.
we've in this group we've talked about these issues, and I'm sure we will continue to talk about them. So, Hamp, will you be next?
Yeah,
And briefly.
like you, Nicholas, I've been a divided disciplines person between political and personal. I did social relations and philosophy at Harvard, and I was community and clinical psychology in my PhD program. And the most of my political experience came during the Vietnam War, which I participated in enthusiastically, but following my own commitment to nonviolence. Amen.
Okay.
Okay, David Allen.
Um, Here in Concord, Mass, but I'm an Indiana farm boy. I've had as I say, a pastiche of a life in business, in university, government, um, all of that for another time. Maybe I came to my activism later in life, but certainly it feels like it's been forever now, certainly the last decade or two. And of course, the hope is to try to keep our democracy from disappearing. Looking forward to hearing and appreciated Albert getting detail. The rest of us know each other. Good to know you now.
Okay, Cindy.
Yes, Cindy Wardle, grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was in the class of 63. During college, I was a peace wonk. I was in Tucson and went to a lot of, I went to several peace marches, and I did a lot of collating of information, of literature. And then I was in the Peace Corps. And shortly after that, I moved to Italy and have had a not very impressive career. Uh, and I'm still living in Italy.
Jeff. Jeff.
Jeff.
Oh, hi. Yeah. Oh, Jeff Fox, originally from Chicago. My activism, I guess, started in Harvard. I was president of the Socialist Club for a couple of years, and we did what we could. For this was the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, among other things, and the war in Indochina getting was building up. And as an undergraduate, I became got very enthusiastic about national liberation movements, a number of them. And I had actually hoped to get to West Africa, Guinea in particular, which was I wrote my thesis on the Guinea movement and their independence from France. But as it happened, I got recruited for community organizing work in Venezuela. So my geographic fixation turned to Latin America, and I spent several years as as a community organizer, and then as a sociologist working on Latin American themes. I'm now living in Spain, writing fiction and still trying to express political ideas through the fiction.
Great. David,
I was born in Medford, Mass, and uh, moved to Puerto Rico when I was 5 years old, and grew up in Puerto Rico. And then we moved to Rio de Janeiro, and then we moved to Guatemala, or we moved to Guatemala, and then we moved to Rio. And I came up to Andover from Rio and went to Harvard. Had a year off where I traveled around the world, and it was a fellowship, so I was not on my nickel, which was nice. And then went to the Harvard Business School and got interested in public broadcasting, and have been in public broadcasting ever since in uh, in in New York and in Philadelphia at WNET and at WHYY in Philadelphia.
great. John Woodford.
Oh, hi. Here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I was in university journalism for a while before that, ranging from Muhammad Speaks, or as editor-in-chief. I worked for New York Times. I worked for other newspapers. And I've been mainly interested in anti-racist peace movements, national liberation movements, anti-colonial, post-colonial, and all that stuff. And I grew up in Benton Harbor, Michigan, a very little town on Lake Michigan, across the lake from Chicago.
What were you just smoking?
I'm
Okay.
smoking a Dominican cigar that my middle sister sent me from California. I don't know where she got it. Has no label.
John Wiener.
Hi, I live in Stamford, Connecticut. Long ago, I worked in the Lindsay administration in New York City, then at McKinsey, and finally founded two healthcare companies. I suppose my latest effort in politics is my wife and I put together a giving circle called the Rule of Law for the ACLU, which was quite successful.
Okay, let's see. Jack?
Jack Hammond. Hi, Nick.
Hey.
After Harvard, I went into the Peace Corps in Peru, spent 2 years, and had a profound effect both on my later political and professional activity. I came back and got a PhD in sociology at Chicago, came to New York, taught briefly at Columbia, and taught for a very long time at Hunter College and the Graduate Center, where Nick was my colleague. I am, as I said to some, this is only my second time in this group, but as I said to you last week, I'm involved in DSA. I did a lot of research and political activity. Coming back from Peru in '65, I was very engaged in the anti-Vietnam War struggle, and then in various struggles around Latin America, including Chile and Central America. I wrote a book about El Salvador, among other things. But in recent years, and I'm very happy to have joined this group at just the right time to see Nick, because I've been planning to talk to him, I have been engaged in a study of degrowing the healthcare system. That is to say, I'm committed to degrowth as a general principle, and I think it can be applied to the healthcare system as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing this talk today, and maybe your private talk sometime soon after.
We're taking too much time with our introductions, so others, please be briefer. Liz?
Hi, try to be brief. Also, class of 63. I'm a clinical psychologist. I live outside of DC in Tacoma Park, but I am actually from California. Very interested in looking at my enslaver ancestors. And also, I was involved in trying to work for Prop 186 in California. So I've been interested in healthcare issues for a long time and grew up in a very left political family. So I've been hearing about, I was hearing about the Taft-Hartley Act when I was a kid. So my involvement is way, way back.
Ron,
Beginning backward, 20 minutes ago, I was working on a political spot for Volunteer Blue based on some footage of baby seals I shot in New Zealand a few years ago in order to seal Trump's fate as a floundering president. We'll see if it works. I was working at WGBH about a week after graduation, been in some form of TV and video ever since, only got involved intensively in activism about a dozen years ago for the climate movement as I got freaked out about the changing climate.
Bill Collins.
Hi, Bill Collins. Grew up in the Boston area, Harvard 63, like the rest of these folks. 20 years in the Navy, operated nuclear-powered ships and oil-fired ships, and later on developed a close familiarity with much faster reactors that go on missile warheads and so on at the national labs. Retired from the Navy, went to work for Westinghouse for a little while, then moved to Savannah River site to work there on nuclear waste cleanup. Now retired, but I'm still in Aiken, South Carolina. I noticed that Lindsey Graham passed away a couple of days ago.
Good work. Let's see, who did I not call on? Marcy can't talk. Fred, are you there?
Me?
Yeah.
Hang on.
Fred.
Can you?
We hear you.
We were hearing you. Now you're muted.
Now you're
Oh,
muted.
there you are.
weren't.
Now,
I'm
There you go.
still in. I'm
Good.
still inept. I had Luddite tendencies that I regret very much. I got active in the peace movement and anti-war work and SNCC work right after school, and I wound up setting up anti-war coffee houses in army towns during the war. I'd been in the 6-month, what we used to call the 6-month program. And then I split with the left as led by Tom Hayden and took a few wrong turns. And I wound up with a straight job at UC Med Center. And I had a son with epilepsy, got very interested in marijuana as an anti-seizure medication. And I watched as the medical marijuana movement made cannabis safe for capitalism and drifted away from it.
How is your health, Fred?
I'm hanging in there, Albert. Great to see you. I like your beard.
Thank you.
Marcy can't talk. I think I've called on everybody except myself. So I'm David Lelyveld, class of 63. And I'm a historian of India, actually. My activism, it's hard for me to remember when it started. A high school demonstration against bomb testing. When I got to Harvard, picketing Woolworths, going on a peace march with a group from Toxin. Toxin, one of our former members of this group who sadly died was the one student ahead of Albert at the Bronx High School of Science, Todd Gitlin, and who had a troubled relationship with Fred. And then what else? Then I was in SDS when I was a student at the University of Chicago. And then I went off to India for some time. And when I came back, things had changed. And I was actually in a group that was an activist group briefly called the Concerned Asian Scholars, involved in the war, in the anti-war movement. And the next one was Brera, which was a Jewish peace movement for reconciliation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And then the next one was, I had a hard time finding my place, but I was in DSA for a while and sort of lapsed out of it, mostly because the group that I was in frittered away and I couldn't find people who were quite on my wavelength as far as more style and interests than others, although maybe I'll rejoin Jack, who I met through DSA. And that's enough. So our speaker today, and we don't usually take all this time introducing ourselves. Our speaker today is Nick Freudenberg, and he's a friend of mine, a neighbor in the same neighborhood of Washington Heights in New York City. And otherwise, I'll ask him to introduce himself.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet all of you, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. I have lived in New York for the last 60 years. I came in 1966 to Columbia College, got quickly involved in the anti-war activism, and got thrown out of Columbia in 1968. Spent a week at Rikers Island. I joke I learned more in a week at Rikers Island than 2 years at Columbia College, and worked for a while for SDS doing organizing in New York. And then finished my undergraduate education at Hunter College and got introduced to CUNY, where I have spent a good part of my life. I finished my studies in the School of Public Health at Columbia and chose public health because I wanted an opportunity to pursue academic interests and activist interests. And public health has a long tradition of combining activism and science. And so I've worked over the years on a variety of issues: childhood lead poisoning, AIDS, mass incarceration. I spent 12 years leading a jail reentry program at Rikers Island, food insecurity, and food justice. I'm going to talk in just a few minutes about my latest book, which is called Fighting for New York: Activism for Health and Social Justice Since the 1960s. It's my effort to understand the range of health activism in New York City and how it's contributed to improving health and social justice in New York, and also what some of its limitations are. And I'm particularly interested in what lessons we can learn for addressing health problems in the years to come. So my one focus of academic work and activism has been social movements and public health campaigns. The other has been looking at corporate influences in health. And I've worked over the last several years with a group at the World Health Organization to document what has come to be called commercial determinants of health, looking at the role of the food industry and the healthcare industry and the financial industry on patterns of health and disease around the world. And we had a group of us put together a report for the World Health Organization that will be coming out in the first part of 2027 that looks at the sort of status of how countries around the world are addressing these commercial determinants of health. I'm going to show just a few slides to give you a quick overview of health activism in New York since the 1960s, say a few things about that, and then really use most of our time for your questions and comments on that. So let me switch to that. So I wanted to talk about a few activists who are people who I think embody the history of activism around health in New York City. The person you see here is Evelina Lopez Antonetti, who founded United Bronx Parents in 1965. And she and the group mobilized Puerto Rican parents in the Bronx to demand better schools, improved food, and public services that respected their dignity. And Antonetti illustrated three traits of what I came to believe is effective leadership: connecting daily survival issues to a unifying social vision, recognizing that educated community residents, in her case parents, could force systemic change, and balancing service provisions with aggressive advocacy, something that many groups have tried to do over the years. School food became central to United Bronx Parents' agenda, and by linking education and health, UBP broadened its appeal. Antonelli said that our children have the right to the best food and the best education, directly refuting the institutional message that Puerto Rican children didn't deserve success. And instead, UBP made schools a strategic site for challenging inequality. And by bringing together the fight against segregation in New York City, for better schools and for better food, she was able to bring together parents, community residents, advocacy groups, and to actually lead to systemic change. The second person I want to talk about is Bernice Miller. And she and her fellow community residents founded We Act, West Harlem Action for Environmental Justice, in 1988 to protect West Harlem after the city decided to relocate a planned sewage treatment plant from a white neighborhood to their African American community in West Harlem. And Miller called this decision, that said it had transformed one of the city's most beautiful communities into a giant dumping ground. And after losing its initial fight to block the plant, West Harlem residents built the political power necessary to get major concessions from the city, secure pollution controls that helped clean the air in their community, but also the Hudson River, and force the city to build a major state park directly on top of the treatment plant. And Miller believed that these strategies demonstrated that neighborhood women could lead the charge. It was women, after all, she said, who endured the noxious odors at home, led local civic and religious groups, and cared for children whose asthma was exacerbated by pollution. And what We Act did was to fuse traditional gender roles with an aggressive new activism willing to confront male-dominated political machine. And later, they expanded nationally, working with groups across the city and the country to convince Bill Clinton to sign an executive order mandating that federal agencies identify and reduce disproportionate health impacts on low-income populations and communities of color. And this demonstrated how local action leads to national action and the birth of the environmental justice movement, which changed the way the federal government responded to that. And unfortunately, of course, Trump has undermined most of those changes. And the third person I want to talk about is Mark Haney, who has led for more than 25 years Metro New York Healthcare for All, steering a path between transformative political change and securing incremental reforms. A persistent advocate for the federal Medicare for All, first developed by Bernie Sanders, and the New York State Universal Health Care Act, a measure supported by the majority of New York City and state residents, passed the Assembly several times, the Senate once or twice, but has been not enacted. And I think the strength of Mark Haney and Healthcare for All is that he can combine advocating for federal transformative changes while also going to Albany each year to fight for increased funding for the public hospital system in New York City, for Medicaid, and for access to health care for immigrants, a key population in New York. And Jack, I'm eager to talk to you about the increasing role of private equity in healthcare in New York City and the nation. I think a really profound threat, trying to escalate the healthcare system's commitment to profit generation rather than to improving health. And by combining this both and approach rather than either or, Haney demonstrated effective activism. I just wanted to show you a few other pictures and then pose some questions and then open it up for discussion. The Young Lords Party, the group that I begin my book with, organized in New York in the late 60s, early 70s. It started as a street gang in Chicago. And one of their amazing accomplishments was they combined fighting for women's health and access to reproductive and sexual health, opposing sterilization abuse with a commitment to Puerto Rican people and other people of color. And this photo shows some of the women who were leaders in the Young Lords Party, an important part of that movement. And this also from the Young Lords, showing their ability both to mobilize community residents, but also to challenge the city. And when they thought New York City wasn't doing enough to fight the epidemic of tuberculosis that affected poor New York City communities, in part because the city had dropped the ball on its tuberculosis control programs, they liberated a testing truck for chest x-ray, took it out, recruited doctors from Lincoln Hospital to actually test people in the community, and then brought their findings to the city health department and demanded that the city respond more forcefully to tuberculosis, which did lead to some improvements. They followed a similar path around lead poisoning, an issue I worked on for 10 years, and led to New York being behind the ball in lead poisoning control, to eventually, including through a lawsuit that I was part of, that forced the city to develop stronger lead poisoning laws. In New York City, in the fight against Medicaid cuts that was true in the 1970s in the fiscal crisis, in the 1992 in the Great Recession, and now again, healthcare worker unions played a key role in creating alliances between users of healthcare and healthcare workers to fight against cuts to Medicaid. And 1199 is one of those unions that has led some of those fights. This is a beautiful picture. It shows Housing Justice for All, a group that brought together housing activists from New York City and New York State. This is a demonstration in the state capitol in, I think, 2019 that led to new limitations on landlords' ability to use evictions to get rid of tenants who weren't paying rent. And Housing Justice for All played a really important role in moving the legislature to having a more progressive view of the rights of tenants compared to the rights of landlords and developers. And working with DSA and working families parties and several unions, they've moved the needle, and they're now playing a major influence in the Mamdani administration developing its housing agenda. Their leader, Say Weaver, has become one of Mamdani's key housing advisors. Many of you are familiar with ACT UP, and they really played a key role in forcing the city to respond to the AIDS epidemic more forcefully after Ed Koch, similarly to Ronald Reagan at the national level, didn't want to let the word AIDS and HIV cross their lips. A particular accomplishment of ACT UP that I wanted to highlight is before the days of social media, they mastered public communications using everything from radio, television, and mass media to street signs and posters. And these two posters, one challenging Ed Koch for not doing enough around AIDS, the other for Steve Joseph for monkeying with the numbers around AIDS, illustrated their success in putting AIDS on the city agenda. And in my book, I say one of the accomplishments of the activist movements was moving issues onto the city's agenda. Another group I profile is the community food advocates, which over many years of struggle eventually got free school lunches and breakfasts for every public school child in New York City, helping to address food insecurity in what I think is a really meaningful way. And I wanted to end and open it up for your questions, thoughts, discussions with some questions. A question that I raise in the book is, what have we learned from the activism in New York City and nationally around health and justice since the 1960s that could inform an activist agenda during what I'm calling the age of Zohran Mamdani and Donald Trump. One representing a new approach to thinking about affordability and social justice, the other a different approach. The second question, how could activist city government and progressive political parties create a vision and agenda for health that could serve as a model for other cities, states, and the 2028 election cycle? And the last question, what role can working to improve human and planetary health play in coalescing a more unified, less siloed progressive movement? And in my book, I think one of the weaknesses of the progressive movement, both in health and beyond, is the tendency for each group to fight for its own needs. And with that, I really welcome your comments and reactions and turn it back to you, Dave, for figuring out who's going to say what. I'm
Okay,
also putting in the
so
chat an op-ed that I wrote that appeared in City Limits yesterday that highlights some of these issues.
well, thanks, Nick. It was very interesting, and we all have to read your book. Nick has a previous book from just 2 or 3 years ago, At What Cost? Modern Capitalism and the Future of Health, which reaches out beyond New York City. A few of us are New Yorkers, or from New York originally, but most of us aren't, and so we have different perspectives on things. I happen to live in the People's Republic of New York City under Zohran Mamdani's leadership, and have that advantage. We'll see what happens with that. So please raise your hands if you want to respond to Nick's questions or any other. Ron, you're first.
Okay, I was struck in
Yes.
the questions you left us with that you're future facing. What can we do to affect 2026 midterms and the 2028 election? And the thing that I'm thinking of now is not so much what's on the Republican side. I mean, they're going to put infinite money and infinite bile into their campaigns. But it just seems like there's a kind of logjam on the Democratic side because people feel badly about you feel the Democratic Party is weak and we don't have leaders and stuff like that. And I'm not sure that that logjam is accurately described. Do you know what I mean? I think there are probably things we can do, and I'm curious what you have to say about what we can do in the next few months for the midterms, based on your experience.
Sure. Thanks for that question, Ron. It's a really important one. And I think the belief that there aren't alternatives, the belief that no better world is possible are both, I've seen those in my 60 years of activism recurrently after, Ronald Reagan won, after Richard Nixon won. So it's not new. And I also think that the current people in power, both in Washington and on the corporate side, promote that doom and gloom view because it allows them to advance their agenda. I had the privilege of hearing just this weekend the two leaders of Indivisible give a public talk. And I think they have some promising answers for just your question. They're saying that showing the possibility of mass local action building up to the 26 election and the 28 election are important ways to counteract that feeling of pessimism. And the three No Kings demonstrations that I'm sure most of you have heard about of the last year and a half, each of them set a new record for the number of people mobilized into action in the United States, topping the two previous records, one of the women's movement in the first year of the Trump administration, who came into action on the women's demonstration at the first in the first weeks of the Trump administration, and the demonstrations across the country in Black Lives Matter. So I think the fact that millions of people, I think the estimate for the latest No King's Day was 8 million people across the country willing to come into action is a very positive sign. And we need to build on that, support that, encourage the organizations and people we know to participate in that. I also think we can learn from the other side. And I think the 2025 agenda that the Republican Party and the Heritage Institute developed provided a vision for people on the right. And we need to be working on developing a comprehensive vision that holds optimism for the future. There are groups working on that. I think the tendency is to have a laundry list instead of a vision. And I think we need both specific proposals and a vision of a society where human well-being comes before corporate profit. I'll stop there because I see, Liz, you have your hand up too.
Liz, yeah, go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I'm very interested to hear a little bit more about commercial determinants of health. I'd really like you to talk about that for a few minutes because I think that's something that I need to educate myself about, and it's clearly something that's on the horizon. And I'm not a doom and gloom person at all. I very much believe that if you don't have a vision, you can't do anything. And I would like to hear what you have to say about that.
Sure. So corporate influences on health is defined as the ways a market economy where profit is the unifying goal influences patterns of health and disease. And it is an expansion of a public health concept that came about maybe a decade or two ago called social determinants of health, saying that people's housing and working conditions and environmental quality determined health. What I like a few things about the idea of commercial or corporate determinants of health. One, I think it provides an alternative to the mainstream view that healthcare provides the solution to our country's and the world's health problems. And I think healthcare is important, but most of our problems have deeper roots than the medical care. And I think it also provides an alternative to the idea that it's individual behavior. Clearly, smoking, diet, alcohol use are important, but I think we really need to look at how wealth and power are distributed. And that's what those of us who do research on the corporate determinants of health. And the other thing I'll say is I think the advantage of this view is it allows us to focus attention on the spider in the web. And the spider in the web is the 500 or 1,000 corporations that are dominating the global economy. And their decisions about food determine what people in the United States and around the world eat. Their decisions about healthcare, where to invest or disinvest, determine where we get our health care. And if I get a chance, I'll put in the chat, or I can send to David to send to the list a few articles that provide an overview of this commercial determinants of health. The last thing I'll say on this, I'm also interested in making this practical. And through the food policy group I work at the CUNY School of Public Health, we have developed campaigns against what we call predatory marketing of unhealthy food to children. Advertising foods that we know put children in increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, and certain forms of cancer. That ought not to be moral or legal in a decent society, to persuade vulnerable people to buy and consume things that science has proved will make them sick. And so we've been working with state legislators and the city health department to strengthen regulation around predatory marketing, and have had some little food. And we've also trained young people to be counter marketers of unhealthy food. And that's actually worked very well. Those people who have mothers or fathers or grandmothers with diabetes are very motivated to take action. I'll stop again.
Any hands up? Ron, is your hand still up, or is
no, it's just a footnote. I'll be brief. You talked about 8 million people coming out for No Kings, and I think Indivisible is terrific. But that's not nearly what Chenoweth says, 3.5% of the people have to persistently, that's not just one demonstration, mobilize for it to have a revolutionary or significant effect.
That's what they said too. And
That's
you,
yeah. And so I was just wondering, a brief comment on that. I know you have a lot of ground to cover.
right. Well, I think activism, and particularly the local activism that I write about in New York, is the mechanism that will bring people into action, the way it did in West Harlem around environmental conditions, the way it brought thousands of parents of school children into motion, and what all of us and groups like Indivisible need to do is find ways to connect that local activism with national activism. And that's hard. There's no magic formula, but we've seen it happen in the past. We certainly saw it in, my early days around opposing the war in Vietnam. So we need to find ways to do that in the 2020s.
John Woodford.
Oh, hi. I wanted to thank Nick. The material you sent out, David, and you sent out included an article I wanted to plug, and I wish you could tell us about the organization called, I guess it's PLOS One, PLOS One, which has the article, The Science for Profit Model, How and Why Corporations Influence Science and the Use of Science in Policy and Practice, which was a tremendous article by this independent peer-reviewed journal. And I will send the link. It's the authors are Tess Legg and others. And I wonder if you could say, Nick, something about that organization or that publication, because it analyzes the wide pernicious influence of corporations on science, in general, including medical science.
Yes. And I think the attacks on science is another theme we could all talk about today, both coming from the Trump administration and coming from industry. We see a new aggressiveness on the part of the tobacco industry. PLOS One, as far as I know, is a family of journals that looks to make it easier to get research out to a wide audience. As far as I know, they're still struggling to come up with the other side, which is how do you fund science that is available to the people? And that, for all of us who do research, and this is especially a problem with the big cuts in federal research funding that Trump and the Republican majority have imposed in the last year or two, that it's harder and harder for for researchers not sponsored by big institutions to get their research out. And PLOS One and other publications address one side of that, that it makes it easier for people to read them, and people around the world. Many of their journals are open access, and that's particularly important in developing nations where the paywall protected journals are just not available. But I think it speaks to the need for a media environment that we as researchers, scientists, and activists need to create. And the right wing has done a much better job of that than we have. And I think there's more work to be done in making science both available to people who want it and understandable. And I think I agree with you. That's a key issue and a key task.
Pam,
I don't know how much time we have today.
we have time. Let's.
Yes, go
Yeah,
ahead.
great. Okay, I just wanted to say I thought it was a very effective presentation, and I think there has been a vast amount of mobilization that keeps getting shown around anti-ICE demonstrations and so on, that is shown a lot by Maddow and now MSNBC and MS Now often. And I think it's more a question of how to help them focus and expand to a more comprehensive thing. But I think a lot of the organization is already occurring.
David Allen.
Let me build on that, perhaps, though note first that your presentation, Nick, leaves me thinking, oh my goodness, have we got an energetic future in front of us? Bring it home. You clearly lived your life there. Thank you for that. I'm struck, problem you've identified, vision, and particularly the fact that we start from a bunch of little splinters, and those splinters want each to go their own way instead of getting into something unified. You even characterize by noticing how local efforts can grow into national efforts, and also New York efforts into New York State efforts and so forth, which is, of course, this business of coming together into a larger group. I think back to examples we have that they've been mentioned here, how Vietnam became a national effort and succeeded. In fact, drove the government out of the war so that we were ignominiously defeated. I noticed a pivot in that was that there was a draft, and therefore the sons of the middle class were being killed. And that helped rouse a nation against it. What do we have now? I'm curious your thoughts since you're in the middle of this. What might be some effective mechanism to get the splinters to come together into a single focus, particularly around the question of inequality?
Well, I can tell you again what Indivisible is planning to focus on between now and the 26th election. And there are really three themes. And I think having unifying themes that those of us working at each level can connect to. And their three themes are protecting democracy and the 2026 and 2028 elections, and to be very focused and specific. They fear that the Trump administration will work in a number of ways to undermine those two elections, and that being ready for that, and they and many other organizations are working on that. So I think that is one way to really focus on the immediate threat. And the other is, the deeper threats to democracy. And they, Indivisible, are also looking to lessons from Hungary and from Brazil and from other parts of Europe and the world. We're not alone in fighting to protect our democracy. And what can we learn from other people? The election in Hungary a few weeks ago was really, it's not like a progressive candidate won, but the reversal of the autocratic government is really a turning point that opens a door. And I think the third point they made, which I hope speaks to your question, is corruption. And I think for them, what the leaders of Indivisible said is that Trump is spending billions of dollars on redesigning his ballroom, on bombing Iran and other parts of the Middle East, on changing the face of Washington. And these is money that he has taken away from Medicaid, from SNAP, from scientific research that could protect lives in the future. And that very concrete way of showing how the corruption is leading to budgetary changes that affect people's ability to pursue their well-being. So those were some of the ideas they heard. And I think being able to popularize those is really important. I see other hands.
Jack, your turn.
Yeah. This is slightly different from the last question, but focused not on the political sphere, but generally on how we produce a healthcare system that serves the interests of patients. And you've mentioned a number of cases, activist groups, AIDS, school advertising of unhealthy food to children, toxic dumps and so on. And there, you know better than any of the rest of us, are the hundreds of other possible causes that we could engage in, whether it's drug advertising or commercial funding of research that slants the research into the interests of the commercial funders, or many, many more. It seems as though, from your examples that you gave and the ones that I could also think of, it's possible to organize a targeted campaign around a specific issue and get the people who have a definite interest in that issue activated around it. But you kind of alluded to this in your initial remarks, that bringing them together in a common struggle to think about health as a general issue and how do we make all of these things contribute to overall reforms or revolutions. Just tell us where you think that should go or might be able to go.
Yes. And again, I think there isn't going to be one fight that can do it all. And what I think we need to do, and again, I pointed to Mark Hanet's, sort of both and instead of either or, fighting for the day-to-day, resisting the cuts in funding for healthcare, particularly for low-income folks, and also holding on to the vision of universal healthcare. And I think essential to it, and this is where my interest in activism and corporate determinants of health allied, I think a healthcare system that is controlled by the healthcare industry cannot serve health. And I think getting that message across and diminishing their influence and posing a model that is an alternative where the public interest is in control of the healthcare system. And the reality is, it shouldn't be so hard. Every other country has come up, every other developed country has come up with a model of a national healthcare system. And we need to, and the majority of American people support substantial reform in how we organize and pay for healthcare. So we need to get focused and smarter. And I think I'm not I think Obama made some progress on healthcare and also made some mistakes. I'm not all down on the Affordable Care Act, nor thinking it's the best thing since chopped chicken liver. So I think Obama's mistake was believing he could reach a compromise with the health insurance industry. And I think, Biden had some of the same issues, and we need to build support for the notion that there's certain things you don't compromise, and that having underlying our healthcare system a commitment to population well-being instead of to profit is one of those. And that's not going to happen overnight. So I think we need to look for ways, and I think doing it at the local level, and the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, the largest urban public hospital system in the country, is one model of that. But in another way, so is veterans health care. And we need to keep fighting to make that better and more public and less privatized. I hope that speaks to some of your question, Jack.
Can we go on a little bit beyond 1 o'clock? Because we took a lot of time with our introductions.
Yeah, what I always think about when I'm the Zoom host is we go to 110, then we think about, do we want to go any further than 110?
Okay. Now your hand is up. Do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, this is going in a slightly different direction. I was thinking about how to involve more people. And I was thinking about 3 different groups and the issue that gets them. One is I've just been fascinated at the uprising against data centers. I think that's pulling in a lot of people who don't normally think of themselves as being on the left, who may not think of themselves as being active in any way, and who are actually just saying, no, we can't do this. So that's one group of voters. I think everything related to ICE is pulling in another group of voters who seem to have gone for Trump in 24, but aren't going to go anywhere near the Republican Party again. And I think that's a large percentage of Latino voters. And I guess a question that I would have for you is, what about the ones under 30? because in terms of the kind of doom and gloom and basically under 30s thinking, don't trust anybody over 30, just as, that was kind of a slogan back in the 60s, that the possibility of things going right, I think, is something that they don't hold very strongly. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts about, particularly about the under 30s, but also these other things that are just really galvanizing people that were not galvanized in 2024.
Great point. And I very much agree with you about all three. Data centers, I think, are big issues around the country in rural, as you're suggesting, and suburban areas, as well as cities, and therefore can bring together people who used to be polarized red-blue. It's also a really important way to talk about climate change and the threats that data centers present on the climate front. And I think Bill McKibben has been brilliant in sort of bringing together climate issues and mobilizing both older people, the, sort of over 60, and young people. And I think climate is really a good issue to do that. And I think we need to be looking for issues that enable us to bring those things together. And I think I also agree with you around ICE, that I think many American people are horrified by even if they have concerns about immigrants, the notion of cruelty and viciousness that ICE's presence shows, I think is anathema to many Americans. And we need to find ways to build and support that, and maybe to connect it to other law enforcement issues, other concerns about over-policing and mass incarceration as the solution to our problems. I have a lot of experience teaching young people, some under 30, some in their 30s. And of course, I teach in New York. I taught for 45 years at City University of New York, recently retired. And I find a mix among the students I serve, that some of them really want to be activists and come to school because they want to develop that. And I think there are a lot of idealistic young people around, and at least some of the participants in the most recent No King's Day were young people, as well as people of the age cohort on this Zoom call. So I think we need to elevate that. I also think we need to speak directly to that feeling of doom and gloom, the hopelessness around the economy, around people caring about them. And I think in many ways, I believe that activism is an antidote to depression, and that I think there's some research showing that people who are active, whether it's at the local level or the national level or the global level, feel better about themselves and feel empowered. So I think we need to connect those ideas and give people the opportunity to be active. So those are some thoughts.
Great. Thank you.
John Wiener.
Nick, I was listening to you earlier on here, and I realized I was on the other side of a number on a number of the points you were making.
I was hoping that might be the case, that someone would be.
Well, anyway, but on that score, by the way, the Young Lords actually took over Lincoln Hospital, and you might want to make that point when you referred to that.
They took over the nursing residents. They didn't interfere with care at all.
No, I understand, but it was really important in terms of developing the new hospital, and getting that done. But
Yes.
the point I want to make, though, is there are some real outrages now. The taking people off Obamacare at 4 million, which was at the very high end of people's estimates of what would happen, dealing with reductions in SNAP, which are really causing great havoc. And I'm just puzzled that those outrages haven't really reached the kind of level of the boiling level, and probably should. And I'm not entirely sure what you do about that, but if you just step back and think about that, those are completely outrageous efforts.
Yes. I think there is a growing recognition. Another of my projects over the last almost decade has been to improve food, housing, healthcare, and mental health services for CUNY's 240,000 students. And we have, and I've been doing this for a while, but in the last 6 months, we've gotten the attention of the mayoral administration, of the CUNY chancellor for assisting students to keep their SNAP coverage, keep their Medicaid coverage, get help in avoiding being terminated. And I think it's this environment that has allowed us to enlist support. And we've gotten help from the city agency that administers SNAP in screening people and at the central level rather than forcing each individual to appeal. So I'm hopeful that as people lose these benefits, which are really an important strategy for reducing the adverse impact of poverty in this country, more people will feel that, and people in the healthcare system, doctors and nurses, and people in the food system. Supermarkets rely heavily on SNAP, and if their revenues are cut by 20% because people no longer have SNAP. So we need to mobilize all those constituencies.
David Allen?
I was intrigued in your presentation, since I'm not familiar, about the young lords just simply taking the TV test truck. I hear now there's more to this tale. It helps give a concrete case for a question I think is floating here for us. To what extent can we make change incrementally? And to what extent, on the other hand, do we have to be extreme? Of course, eventually it gets to the question of violence and things like the young lords taking something or taking over a building and so forth. But before we get to the question of tactics, are we at a state where, with what Jonathan was just describing, these outrages have happened, these losses and so forth, that we're going to have to think in terms of step changes, not ACA, not incremental?
So I think I looked at that question pretty closely in writing this book, Fighting for New York. And the book includes profiles of 9 activist campaigns over the last 60 years. And what I came to conclude about the question you asked is there's not a generic answer to the question incremental or transformative. And I think, in social science, there's something called the Overton window, where you look at the opportunities for change based on political and economic circumstances. And I think activists and scholars need to get better at identifying the particular opportunities. My own feeling is in New York and nationally in the next few years, we'll have an opportunity for transformative change because of some of the outrages that we've been talking about today, around ICE, around climate change. I think the COVID pandemic, and if we have additional epidemics, including some that seem to be incubating now, I think people might be ready for a more robust government responsibility for protecting the health of people rather than protecting profits. So, but it isn't, there's not one answer to that question, and we need to do concrete analysis of specific circumstances at the local, state, and national level to find out what are the opportunities. And what I, as a person who educates and works with activists, am focusing on is how do we educate people to make those determinations and decide now is the time to push for radical change, as the Young Lords did, or now is not the time, we need to be more incremental.
Okay,
So,
we're
I,
at,
I want to intervene if I may. I was struck that at one point I think in reference to the young lords, spoke about the ability in the past to mobilize large movements of people before we had the internet, before we had email, before we had social media. And I'm just wondering now if all of that internet, social media, and such has contributed to the acceleration of the culture of consumerism, which is really at the heart of not only the healthcare problems, but so much of the problems that we have. And how do we combat that? I mean, the overall, how do we get people's attention when there are so many, many things out there that distract them?
can I ask that be the last question? Does that seem
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
everybody?
Okay.
Good. Last question, Nick.
Great. Thank you, David, for that question. And yes, I certainly think, and there are many dimensions to it. There's the development of a surveillance economy where information is used to target people to get them to buy things. There is the development of a media environment that is increasingly dominated by Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and other billionaires and the big corporations. But I think my longer term read is for the first decade of the social media rise, progressive movements didn't understand exactly how to use them. And some people thought we could rely on them for doing organizing and mobilization. And I think the more nuanced understanding that has developed in the last few years is there's some things you can do with social media and influencers and the public, and others which are really worked best in face-to-face communication. Some of the people who've been doing electoral organizing talk about deep canvassing, talk about intensive electoral campaigning, where you actually sit down and talk, especially to your neighbors, about the issues. And those are way more effective than any TikTok video. So I think we need to find ways to combine the two. And I also believe, in line with my interest in commercial determinants, that the increasing control of our economy by a few giant technology and media companies is a threat to all our well-being, and we ought to be looking at following the lead of Europe, which is actually doing better in using the power of government to regulate those entities to limit their role in public influence. And thank you all so much. Your questions have been great. I've enjoyed talking to you. I'll send some more resources to David, who can send them around to you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really, really
Great.
wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, David, for bringing in Nick.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, see you next week.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.